Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Positive Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Parmis, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you want to listen to more episodes like this one on self-improvement, mindset, and wellness, go ahead and hit that follow button to join the family. I want to start off by giving another weekly shout out to the listeners from my top 5 cities. Toronto and Montreal at number 1 and number 2. And then we have 3 new cities this week. So Charlotte, North Carolina at number 3. Amsterdam, Netherlands at number 4, and Sydney, New South Wales at number 5. Very interesting, and thank you so much for making it to the top 5. I hope you guys can continue sharing this podcast with friends, family, and socials so we can all learn a thing or two from each other. And before I get into today's episode, I just want to ask you guys for a very kind favor, and that is if you haven't yet left a review, I would absolutely appreciate if you could do so. It would help so much to build this podcast and help it grow so that we can increase the positive impact we make and make it a bigger production. Today, I want to dive into something that's very close to my heart, and that is my favorite self-help books and the lessons I've soaked up from them over the years. You know, when you read a book that just really sticks with you and you find yourself bringing it up in conversations or flipping through pages again months later, that is the energy I want to talk about today. And mind you, I am not a reader by any means. I actually find it very difficult to pick up a book and read. I am a podcast girly through and through, and the only books I've ever read from start to finish are self-help books that I've built the discipline to pick up and finish. So this advice is coming from someone who is very picky when it comes to self-help books. And that being said, the books I'm talking about today are books that are so impactful that they will change your life because they changed my life. So if you're in that mood to refresh your mindset, or you're just curious about which books I've found especially worth your time, hang out with me for a little bit because I promise this isn't going to be some robotic list of books with stale summaries. Think of this more like a casual chat. I'm here to share why these books truly matter to me and how they shifted my perspective and why I keep recommending them to anyone who will listen. I'll be talking about 5 books specifically. Number 1, Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. Number 2, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Number 3, 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna West. Number 4, Why Men Love Bitches by Sherry Argov. And number 5, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And apologies in advance if I butchered the last names, but let's just dive right in. So I first read Tuesdays with Morrie when I was going through a weird phase. I wouldn't call it a midlife crisis, maybe a mini existential meltdown, but I was just feeling stuck. Someone recommended it, and because the title sounded intriguing, I went for it and I purchased it on Amazon, and little did I know it was going to be this gentle punch to the heart. I'm telling you, I was bawling my eyes out. To tell you quickly what it's briefly about, this book is basically the true story of Mitch Albom reuniting with his old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, who's terminally ill with ALS. And Morrie teaches Mitch crucial life lessons every single Tuesday, and it's part memoir, part life lesson, but mostly it just feels like you're eavesdropping on a heartfelt conversation between 2 people who really respect each other. So 3 lessons that I picked up from Tuesdays with Morrie is number 1, the fragility of life. Morrie's health steadily declines, and he really just shares all sorts of wisdom about appreciating the present, making peace with aging, and not running from the reality that all of us have a ticking clock. And I know that sounds very heavy, but the way that Morrie puts it, he is so honest yet gentle about death. It actually made me more grateful for every moment and really had me reflect on my own mortality, which can definitely be eye-opening and difficult to do if you haven't read this book. The second lesson was cultivating meaningful relationships. And I know it sounds cliche, but Morrie emphasizes that at the end of our lives, we really just crave connection and love more than anything. And that really stuck with me because he talks about how we spend so much time on stuff that's fleeting, like, chasing a job or a job title or a bigger paycheck or superficial achievements. And yet, in the grand scheme of things, connection is what really anchors us in the end. And finally, the third lesson that I picked up from this book is that vulnerability isn't weakness. Morrie is extremely open about his fears, his joys, and even the burdens of his disease. And by being transparent, he actually seems stronger. And that flipped a switch in me about vulnerability because I used to think being vulnerable meant you'd get hurt. But Morrie taught me that showing your softer side or talking openly about fears can actually be a powerful way to connect with others. And it also makes you more likable because you become more relatable. Now, Tuesdays with Morrie is not just a story about dying, it is a love letter to living well, creating meaningful bonds, and bravely showing your true self. And Morrie's wisdom is timeless. It's incredibly moving, and it reminds us that life is shorter and more fragile than we think, but also more beautiful, vibrant, and intimate when we choose to be open-hearted with one another. The biggest takeaway for me is the reminder to slow down and genuinely ask, am I living a life aligned with what I value, or am I just running on autopilot? If I catch myself drowning in deadlines or to-do lists, which is pretty much all the time, I reflect on Morrie's calm wisdom, and even something as small as taking a few minutes to check in with myself each day, it really helps. It's not some grand meditation ritual, just a quick, how am I really feeling and what's weighing in on me? And that check-in was inspired by this book, and I always remind myself to do it as often as possible because I am that person who does drown in to-do lists all the time. It also nudged me to be more intentional in my relationships. I don't want years to go by and suddenly realize I didn't make time for the people who matter. So if you haven't read Tuesdays with Morrie, I highly recommend it, especially if you need a jolt of perspective. Okay, the next one. Yes, I know it's an old classic, and maybe some people roll their eyes thinking it's just used for car salesmen or hardcore networkers. But for me, How to Win Friends and Influence People is like the grandfather of all personal development books. Once I sat down to read it, I realized its advice still holds up insanely well. Now, what it's about. So Dale Carnegie wrote this book back in 1936, and the core idea is how to genuinely build rapport with others, make people feel valued, and navigate social settings in a more thoughtful way. And it's not just about manipulation or clever tactics. The heart of the book is this simple concept. If you treat people with genuine kindness and sincere interest, you'll create better personal and professional relationships. So here are some key takeaways. Number one, sincerity is underrated. The book talks a lot about how just by remembering a person's name or showing authentic interest in what they say, you can create a deeper bond. And it's not rocket science, but we get so caught up in our own heads that we often forget to be present with the person right in front of us. So what I actually do is after anyone's helped me in some way on the phone or in person, I always make sure to ask, what was your name again? And then I thank them using their name. And it's just a small change that can really go a long way. Everyone knows how to say thank you, but to say thank you in their name just makes it a little extra special. Number two, avoid criticizing or complaining. I used to be super guilty of letting negativity slip into conversations, but Carnegie emphasizes that criticizing someone rarely leads to the change that you want. Instead, it just puts them on the defensive and creates a wedge. And this insight made me think more carefully about how I communicate frustrations or feedback. Especially coming from someone who struggles with anger, I have used this not only to my own benefit, but to turn a negative situation into a positive one, using positive constructive feedback. The third takeaway is be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. That is a line straight from Carnegie, and it might sound a bit formal, but what it means is don't hold back on positive reinforcement. If someone does something well, tell them. We're often stingy with compliments because we either assume the person already knows they're great at something or we just don't think it's a big deal. But a genuine compliment can change someone's entire day or week. So yes, I'm out here giving compliments all day, every day, and to things that genuinely pop out at me, not just generic stuff. I really try to make it personal and special. Now, I'm nowhere near perfect with this stuff, but I can say that reading Carnegie's book made me more aware of how I come across in social situations. For instance, if I'm at a party and I'm half listening to someone because I'm preoccupied with something else, I'll catch myself and redirect my focus back to them. And mind you, I am ADHD, so this is difficult, but I also make more of an effort to use people's names when I talk to them. Just like I said earlier, it sounds trivial, but that small step can create a sense of warmth and personal connection. And again, it goes such a long way. So in summary, How to Win Friends and Influence People, it might sound a bit old school, but trust me, the wisdom in it is timeless. I read it back in high school and all of the things still apply. If you're looking to improve your relationships or just upgrade your people skills without being fake, it is worth picking up. Okay, the next book, 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna West. This title might feel bold, and sometimes we see these big claims and roll our eyes, but honestly, this collection of essays by Brianna West got me with its depth. It's like she put a magnifying glass on everyday experiences and highlighted truths you usually skim over. The essays are short enough to digest in one sitting, but they pack some punch, I will tell you. This book is literally 101 essays, each focusing on a different angle of personal development, mindset shifts, emotional well-being, and self-awareness. It's not arranged like a typical self-help book with a single narrative thread. Instead, you can kind of hop around, read an essay at random, and still get something meaningful out of it. And it was great for me who had a short attention span. And, I get bored easily. So it was such an easy read and such an enjoyable read. Some of the takeaways that stood out to me is number one, the power of reframing. One essay I love dives into how we interpret events. Sometimes something bad happens and we label it as negative forever, but what if we were to actually reframe it as a learning experience or a necessary step in our personal growth? We would actually transform how we feel about it because our thoughts equate to how we feel. So if we can control and reframe our thoughts, we change how we feel. It's really just as simple as that. The next one is self-sabotage. Brianna does a killer job of explaining how a lot of us unconsciously block our own potential because of limiting beliefs or fear of stepping out of our comfort zone. And just having that concept spelled out helped me spot those moments where I talk myself out of something great and really work on overcoming those thoughts, those doubts, or beliefs that held me back in life. Next takeaway is mindfulness in daily life. Another recurring theme is the idea of being present. Actually showing up mentally for whatever it is you're doing rather than living in the future or the past. It's not new advice, but the way that she articulates it, it's concrete, real examples, it just really made it sink for me. And all these self-help books, mind you, technically give you the same advice, but through different deliveries. And I absolutely loved her delivery on these pieces of advice. Now, why does it resonate with me? Because I often find that self-help books can be repetitive or they try to oversimplify life's messiness with motivational quotes. And what I appreciate about Brianna's approach is that she doesn't sugarcoat anything, but she also doesn't lean on despair. She walks this balanced line. Life's complexities are real, but we can navigate them by examining our own thought patterns. I remember reading an essay about the difference between liking the idea of something and actually wanting it. For instance, we might like the idea of running a marathon because it looks cool on social media, but do we actually want the daily training or the early mornings or the sore muscles? That question applies to so many things in life. Becoming a business owner, writing a book, traveling the world. Do we just like the idea or do we genuinely want what it takes to achieve that? That perspective alone made me reevaluate so many of my goals. So whenever I'm feeling stuck or uninspired, I'll flip to a random essay. And the best part is you don't need to reread from the beginning. I might just pick something that feels relevant, like an essay on making space for creativity or an essay on building emotional resilience. It kind of acts like a short pep talk, but one that's grounded in real introspection, not cheesy mantras. So if you prefer dipping in and out of a book instead of reading cover to cover, or if you're the type of person who wants quick but potent insights, this is a go-to. Okay, next up, Why Men Love Bitches by Sherry Argov. So the title might raise eyebrows or feel provocative, and honestly, I was skeptical at first, like, what kind of advice is this? But a friend swore by it, so I gave it a shot. And while I don't love the title's shock factor, I have to say the book is entertaining and the underlying themes are actually pretty empowering. So, in a nutshell, the book is about the dynamic between men and women in romantic relationships, focusing specifically on the ways women sometimes become overly accommodating or people-pleasing, losing their sense of self. And Sherry Argov uses the term bitch not to describe a genuinely mean or rude person, but rather someone who is secure, independent, and doesn't let themselves get walked on. The book basically calls out how that kind of confidence can be super attractive because it shows you respect yourself and you're not desperate for validation. So some main points that I picked up is 1, self-respect is key. And we all know this, but one of the biggest themes is that you shouldn't sacrifice your interests, friends, or personal boundaries to keep someone interested in you. It's easier said than done when you're really into someone, but it's a lesson that extends beyond dating into any relationship dynamic. Point number 2 is to not be a doormat. And there's a difference between being kind and being so eager to please that you lose sight of your own needs. And this book drives home that setting boundaries from the get-go isn't harsh. It's healthy. And point number 3 is to value your independence. The book suggests that having your own life, hobbies, and passions is attractive because it shows you're a complete person on your own. That means you're less likely to hinge your entire identity on whether someone pays attention to you. Now, why was this surprisingly useful? The tone is snappy and sometimes borderline sarcastic, but it's also funny and straightforward, which can feel refreshing if you've been reading more formal self-help books. And whether or not you identify with the situations that Argov describes, the bigger point about not losing yourself in any relationship is relevant to everyone. This isn't just about romance. Even in friendships, sometimes we let people overstep. Sometimes we say yes to things we hate doing just because we want to be liked. The book helped me see how crucial it is to set a line in the sand for what's acceptable to me without feeling guilty about it. Before reading this book, I was definitely the type to bend over backward for people I cared about. If a friend or romantic partner was upset, I'd scramble to fix it. And the problem was I'd often end up feeling burnt out or resentful, which obviously isn't healthy, but Wyman Lovitch's hammered home the concept that you can be a caring person and still refuse to let someone's mood or demands trample your own needs. So over time, I learned how to say no more confidently, and guess what? My friends didn't abandon me. My relationships actually improved because there was more honesty and less silent resentment. And if you're the type who consistently puts your own needs last, this book might give you the little spark you need to start changing that behavior. Okay, last one is Atomic Habits by James Clear. We're going to move into the world of habits, routines, and personal systems. James Clear's Atomic Habits blew up for a reason. It's like the ultimate handbook for anyone who's ever felt frustrated about not being able to stick to positive changes, whether that's exercising, writing daily, or just forming better routines. So the main idea is that small incremental changes can lead to huge results over time. Just like an atom is tiny but fundamental, atomic habits are small but powerful. And James Clear breaks down the science of habit formation, offering very practical strategies to build good habits and break bad ones. So some core concepts. Number 1, the 1% rule. This is the idea that if you improve just 1% every day over the course of a year, those small changes, they compound. You don't need a massive overnight transformation. You just need consistent, tiny steps. And you will be shocked the results you will achieve over time. The second concept is habit stacking. This is the technique where you attach a new habit to an existing one. For instance, if you already drink coffee every morning, you can decide that right after you make your coffee, you'll spend 5 minutes journaling. Attaching the new habit to an old routine helps it stick much easier rather than if you had to do this by making the decision of whether I should journal or not. You end up doing it on autopilot, basically. Core concept number 3 is that your environment matters. James Clear basically emphasizes rearranging your space to make good habits more convenient and bad habits less so. For example, if you want to read more, leave a book on your pillow so you can hop into bed without seeing it. If you want to eat healthier, keep fruit on your kitchen counter instead of hiding it in the fridge, and vice versa. Keep the unhealthy food in the cabinet and away from your counter. Now, why did this click for me? Because I used to set huge goals like, I'm going to work out 5 times a week, or I'm going to write 2,000 words a day for my school project. And then life would get busy and I'd fail by day 3. That cycle is deflating and it makes you feel like you're not disciplined enough. But Atomic Habits reframe the entire conversation. It's not about willpower. It's about having systems that support tiny progress. So instead of jumping straight to a 5 times a week workout plan, I started smaller. Maybe I just do 10 minutes of exercise every day. And that consistency built up a sense of accomplishment, which motivated me to naturally extend my workouts over time. If there's one phrase from the book that sums it all up, it's you do not rise to the level of your own goals. You fall to the level of your own systems. And that line hits hard if you are someone who's big on dreaming but struggles with follow through. So some practical changes are number 1, tracking habits. I keep a simple habit tracker. It's just a piece of paper with boxes I tick off daily for certain habits, specifically sticky notes. And when I see a streak building, I'm more motivated not to break it. And I stick these sticky notes on the inside of my closet closet door and only I see them, and it is very, very satisfying. Number 2, creating friction for bad habits. I used to spend way too much time on social media, so I put my phone in a drawer during work hours or used an app blocker. And this is before I started working on social media, and it was a problem during school. And doing this made it just a little bit harder to mindlessly scroll. Over time, I didn't rely on the blocker as much because the habits started to fade. So make it harder to engage in those bad habits. Third change that I made is making good habits obvious, like leaving my workout clothes by the bed so I'd see them first thing in the morning. That small visual cue gets me in motion before I can talk myself out of it. So it definitely minimizes thought process and allows me to do things on autopilot. This is one of those books that you can go back to time and time again because the strategies are so adaptable to different phases of life. And if you only pick one habit book in your life, it should be Atomic Habits because it is a strong contender. So those are the 5 books I wanted to share. I know self-help can sometimes be a turn-off term for people. It can kind of conjure images of cheesy motivational speakers or outdated advice that doesn't really acknowledge how complicated life is. But the thing is, good self-help can be transformative when it resonates with where you are in your journey. So pick the one that stands out to you. Despite covering really different topics from forming habits to building relationships to embracing your own independence, these books share a common thread, and that is that they challenge you to reflect on your own life in a practical, relatable way. So number 1, Tuesdays with Morrie, it urges you to treasure life, be present, and nurture meaningful connections. It's kind of a gentle yet powerful wake-up call because it's emotional, but in a way it leaves you feeling lighter about the inevitable difficulties of life. And then the second book we talked about, How to Win Friends and Influence People, it encourages authenticity and empathy in how we relate to others. So people who want to improve their social and interpersonal skills, this book is great for you and it has you covered if you want to be better at talking to people in a more authentic way. The third book we talked about, 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think, it offers a varied perspective on personal growth and mindset. And then the fourth book we talked about, Why Men Love Bitches, it reminds you that respecting yourself and setting boundaries isn't just an option, it's necessary. So if you're fed up with being walked all over, or if you suspect you're losing your sense of self in relationships, then this book is for you. And finally, we talked about book number 5, Atomic Habits, which proves that consistent small changes can reshape your life if you stick with them. So if you want to build lasting routines, Atomic Habits offers a blueprint for introducing real changes into your daily life, no matter how busy or scattered you feel. Now, before I sign off, I just want to say this. You don't have to read all 5, or any for that matter, because here's the thing about personal development. It's personal. That means it's totally okay if you click with a book or a concept that doesn't resonate with someone else. You might pick up How to Win Friends and Influence People and feel like it's too old-fashioned, or you might find Why Men Love Bitches is too snarky. That's cool. The point is to remain curious about learning from different perspectives and see what applies to your life. I also want to throw out a gentle reminder that reading is wonderful, but the real magic happens when you start applying what you've learned. It's one thing to nod along to some wise words and think, great point, and another to actually change your habits or your communication style. I'm definitely guilty of reading a chapter, feeling inspired, and then doing absolutely nothing different. But my best advice is to pick 1 or 2 practical takeaways and try them out for at least a week. See if they work for you. If they don't, no harm done. You learn something about yourself, and if they do, you're on a path to making more meaningful changes. So if you're listening to this and you're in a slump or you just want some fresh inspiration, I encourage you to pick up one of these books. Even if just a single paragraph resonates, it can create a ripple effect in your life. Sometimes one sentence at the right moment is enough to pivot your mindset from stuck to hopeful. And that is all that matters. That is it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and letting me ramble on about my favorite self-help reads. I hope you found something here that sparks your curiosity, whether you grab one of these books or all of them. I genuinely hope they bring you a little bit closer to whatever goals or mindsets you're chasing. And if there's a particular book you think I should read or talk about, hit me up. I'm always looking for something new to dive into. So DM me on @PositiveProof on Instagram. But that is a wrap. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much, and I can't wait to chat with you again in next week's episode. Lots of love, Parmis.